Well, let's get started then. So just a reminder, this is going to be recorded so that people that couldn't see the discussion can see it later. So the idea was we want to talk about dynamic filtering and talk about plans, what it is, talk about some of the plans and how we're going to get it in. It's a feature we've been talking about forever, so I think it's time to start discussing it. And then if we have time, which I'm sure we will have time, we have an entire hour here, we'll talk about timestamps. There's a big problem with timestamps in Presto, and we've been working on a plan to fix that problem and the semantics and there's some things that we've done, some things that need to be done still. So we should have a discussion about that. And then if we have time, I wanted to bring up the question about updating to Java 11. And we have some thoughts, but we also want to get people's thoughts and understand people's constraints and so on. So Ankit, Ranak, do you want to, can you, do you have something, a presentation or something you want to share so you can guide the discussion?
Hey, hi Martin. I've got a small PPT which I can present.
Perfect. So I don't know how you share from your side, but see if you can enable that. Otherwise, we'll figure something else. So
Okay, let me try to share from my side.
Oh, great.
Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so can I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so let me go into the presentation mode. Okay. So the high level problem is well known, so I'll introduce it. So we have, so this is a well-known pattern of queries where we're trying to join store sales, which is a huge fact table, with a dimension table, for example, date underscore dimension. And this dimension table is much smaller than the fact table. So our where clause here has conditions on the dimension table. So in the current implementation, Presto is going to perform full table scan of both the tables. So the problem statement here is, can we skip accessing fact table partitions by doing partition pruning? So here, during the build phase, we will be able to figure out specific dimension keys, and it should be possible to prune the partitions only to those specific keys while scanning the fact table. So in this case, we would know, like for example, d underscore date underscore sk, we would have a small set of values for it, and those values we can use to prune partitions on the while reading the store sales table. The other optimization we can make is, even if we are reading a partition, we can still filter rows by sending only the subset of rows that match the join keys for further processing of the join. And the third item which can be done is that if the storage format supports predicate pushdown like Orc or Porque, we should be able to use these runtime filters to avoid scanning data using the min-max zone maps that are available in those storage formats. So at a very high level, this is what a plan for a join query might look like. And the plan on the left is the plan that we have right now. And with dynamic filter, the idea is that we will be introducing a dynamic filter source uh, which will be present at the build side, and a dynamic filter which is going to be present on the probe side. So this dynamic filter on the probe side, we will want to push it down as deep as possible, close to the node that is producing X. So dynamic filter here basically represents a part of the plan which is going to do actual filtering at runtime as soon as the data is ready. So, and the dynamic filter source is responsible for building predicate data at runtime. So at runtime, this dynamic filter source is a pass-through which takes care of building predicates, and it forwards the data that it has built up so far to the next node. And on the probe side, the dynamic filter is also a pass-through, and it will get used only when the dynamic filter from the source has been completed and it's ready to be utilized on the probe side. So this is a high-level breakup of the work that was being done for adding dynamic filtering to the Presto DB repository. So we have an implementation of this in a branch in Kubol, and but it didn't get merged into Presto DB because the PR wasn't broken up properly into all these subcomponents. So at a very high level, what it consists of is there's going to be a collection mechanism for dynamic filter, which is called dynamic filter summary. There's an optimizer rule which is going to figure out where this dynamic filter expression need to be added in inner join nodes in the plan. And there is a dynamic filtering service which is introduced in the coordinator node. So that service is basically responsible for receiving dynamic filters from worker nodes, and on the probe side, this service has exposed REST endpoints which will be called to consume the completed dynamic filter summaries. So as soon as a dynamic filter summary is complete, it's going to be used in split manager to filter out splits, and it's going to get used on the probe side to filter out rows as much as possible. So in the course of productionizing this feature, we've identified a few gaps with the current implementation. So one of the biggest gaps is that we've used tuple domains for building the dynamic filter. So we've compared this implementation with Hive LLAP's implementation, and in Hive LLAP, they've used Bloom filters for building dynamic filters. So in current implementation, the issue is that if we end up with too many discrete values from the build side, building these tuple domains can get expensive, and then when we try to apply these filters very high, which have very high cardinality of filters. The processing in fact slows down, and it can even be worse for the query performance than if we had not used dynamic filtering at all. So in current implementation, what was done is we basically give up if we figure out on the dynamic filter source operator that if the size of domain or the values that we have seen has exceeded a small limit. So in a lot of cases, we found that even though the dynamic filtering optimization was applicable, because of these aggressive limits, it couldn't be applied. So a possible solution to that is to use bloom filters. So that will allow us to extend dynamic filtering to much larger table sizes. And the other improvement that we can do is to push down min and max value of the tuple domains for each column to the storage formats. So in current implementation, all we do is we filter out data once it has already been scanned on the probe side, but we don't get any reduction in IO from the file system like HDFS or S3. So this is another thing which is implemented in Hive LLAP, and we find that it can have a huge advantage in the query runtime. So yeah, that's pretty much it from my side.
So thanks, Ranak. That was, I think that's pretty good. So what's the status? So you mentioned there's all those commits and PRs from that you had submitted to the old repo. Are you like, what are your plans in terms of submitting them to Presto SQL? Like, do you have a timeline?
Right. So this time we are taking the approach of having the PRs all broken up into smaller commits, and we are starting it. There was already a PR open in PrestoDB for the planner side of dynamic filtering. So what I have done is I have ported that PR to Presto SQL repo, and there's an open request around it. So like as and when it gets reviewed, I will work on it and keep updating it. And then like once that lands, we can like start picking up the next pieces and get that reviewed and get that merged.
Okay. Yeah, we should also create an issue on GitHub to track track and link the whole thing, so that anyone that wants to jump in has a place to follow all the links and figure out where all the pieces are.
Yeah, something similar to the slide you had a couple moments ago, where it was like, here are the 6 pieces. Just we can put those in as like check boxes, so then people can see the progress of where we are.
Okay, makes sense.
And so I don't know if is Carol in the call, or maybe Piotr can comment on it. So there was an old design document about dynamic filtering. So we should probably revive that, and I don't know how close this implementation is to that original design, but it would be interesting to understand, are there any differences? Have we evolved the thinking around some of these things? And we don't need to do it right now, but it's something to consider doing later.
Carol, will you comment?
Yeah, there was a design doc. Maybe we should update it. I expect it's out of date actually, right? So it would be best if it gets updated, because I recall there were some discussions even during from 1 year ago, with Andri at Facebook even. So how to approach the problem, and we came up with some solution. I don't recall exactly what was the approach, but yeah, we should definitely update the design doc to reflect that.
Okay, yeah. So if you guys can find that document once we create the issue, let's link it there so that.
So I recall that the communication, there was a involved piece of communication design, and the fact that the dynamic filter is being passed through coordinator was designed to be an interim solution, and then we wanted to extend that. But of course, we should first make sure this is useful in some applications, and it lands and it merges, and then we should iterate from that to make it more involved, because removing coordinator from the communication will simply help scale this solution, but this is like version 2.
Yeah, so I think like for the initial goal, the idea was to support very small build sites for this reason that the traffic goes to the coordinator. Yeah, and I think it's a good starting point.
Cool. On the question about the Bloom filters, so with Orc, I don't know about Porque. I know Orc can have Bloom filters internally, but I think the issue with being able to take care of their Bloom filter, being able to do an intersection, is we'd have to use the exact same Bloom filter format that Orc is using, which might be different than Porque, which is likely different than every other format. So it's something that I think we should maybe think about more, as like maybe having the connector be able to participate in, here's a piece of information I'd like collected, kind of like we did with the stats design.
Potentially having the connector provide the Bloom filter hatch function, because you know what type of connector you're pushing this down into.
Yeah.
So regarding Porque, I think the latest version of Porque should have the Bloom filter, but I'm not sure the one we use in the Presto has that. The one with the Bloom filter in Porque was added. The PR was added, I believe, last year around August or something, when we were doing the performance testing in GCP. We made that feature request.
Do you know if the Bloom filter in Parquet is the same implementation as in Orc?
That I'm not sure.
Yeah, it has to be like the exact same functions with the data encoded the exact same way, and it's really, really specific. So
yeah, but know that generally the end goal is to push the dynamic filter as low as possible, but it doesn't have to be to the storage level. It may be the case that the condition of the join is something computed, and you would still like to do filtering on this computed value before partitioning the data across nodes.
Yeah.
And so it may be the case that you can push this to the storage level, and can be the case that you cannot do that. And then if you provide a hashing function, it is good that the hashing function can be provided so that it can work on the storage level, but still you need to secure the implementation, the execution when it happens above the storage level, after some projection or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, initially I think the dynamic filtering will just use the raw values, right? So having that, I think you can push down to the storage level, to the RC level or Parquet level without caring for the actual hashes, right? That's initially.
Yeah, I don't want to imply that, like, when the presentation was going on, I was thinking that, like, really we want to do both. Like having a compacted tuple domain, which gets us ranges, is useful in some cases, and having bloom filters is useful in other cases. So
yeah.
like I think we should be talking about doing both.
And doing the simplest first, like what?
Oh,
yeah, we don't need to do everything at once. I think one of the important points about this is we need to to come up with a way to do it incrementally. So it's something that works and gives us some benefit, and that takes us in the direction we want to go. Like it could be like just range filters with tuple domain, and then on top of that we layer bloom filters, and then on top of that we make it possible to push into connectors, that kind of stuff. So we don't want to have to wait until the whole thing is done before we can even consider it.
So we should basically work towards landing what is already implemented and working at Qubel, and so that we can, and then iterate from that.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on this topic? No? Okay. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is timestamps, and Piotr is going to drive that discussion.
Okay, let me share the screen. Wow, so many screens. Do you see the screen, or I need to? Okay, I probably need to. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, so let me talk about timestamps. Probably it's not so performant and juicy subject as dynamic filtering, but it's not simple as well. So first, to those who do not follow the timestamp semantics issue as closely and could be confused what it's all about. So let's recap what's the problem actually. The standard defines a timestamp as something that has fields like year, month, day, hour, minutes, and seconds. So it's like something that represents a wall time, what you see on your calendar and on your clock without reference to the particular time zone. So it does not describe a point in time. So if I say, for example, it's March 13th, 8 o'clock, it's March 13th, 5 o'clock, regardless of who I'm talking to and who receives this information. And in Presto, timestamp doesn't follow the standard, the legacy timestamp, what we have now by default, because it actually represents a point in time, but to make things so like an instant, like a Java timestamp, but to make things less obvious, it represents this point in time with respect to user's session time zone. So if I have a point in time, then depending on my time zone, it will be represented differently. So if I have textually inputted 8 o'clock today, and I'm sitting next to Martin, then someone reading this in different place will see a different hour or possibly different day. The impact, the difference between semantics. So this is not only about reading and writing data when reader and writer are in different time zones. It's also about representability. So if you represent something relative to time in user time zone, then some values cannot be represented because we have daylight saving times, And when we have offset change forward, we skip some time, like this Sunday in western part of US or maybe whole US. Then there is a gap, and this particular date and time cannot be represented in my zone, and so I cannot instantiate an instant of this, like the value of the timestamp type representing this. Also, it impacts how you compute, how you calculate on the timestamp values. So if you add an hour and you have again daylight saving time, you end up adding, like, it looks like adding 2 hours if you compute on the point time semantics. It looks like, not that you add actually 2 hours. It's just the string that is surprisingly different. What it means in Presto and what we would need to change to implement the timestamp semantics compliant with SQL standard. So first thing is to have good representation in the SPI and to decide how these timestamp values should be represented on during processing in memory. Then we need to implement interpretation of literals, colors. We need to provide configuration toggles, session toggles, so that we can have can support 2 semantics at the same time, because we cannot deliver this as a big bang approach. So we need to deliver this incrementally. We need to have good tests, and for tests we need to use types that can reasonably represent the values under test. Last but not least, or actually not last, but we need to update connectors. And for when we change or the type semantics, or when we support new type, we need to update all the connectors that support this type. And for timestamp, this is JDBC connectors, this is Hive connector, Raptor, maybe others, probably certainly others connectors like Cassandra, Mongo. So every such connector needs like separate time spent on investigating what this storage actually represents and how this should be represented in Presto. So at some point, for example, we had a thought that Hive timestamp should be represented in Presto as a timestamp with time zone. I'm not convinced this is correct, but this shows a type of problem that you need to solve. You need to actually understand what this particular value is supposed to represent, and my experience with documentation with various projects is that they avoid being explicit and clear. Then we need to support new timestamp semantics in Presto clients, like in JDBC and in CLI. With JDBC standard mandates that we represent timestamp as Java SQL timestamp, but this representation is not has the same problems as described previously, that some values are not representable, but this time this doesn't depend on the session time zone. This time it depends on the JVM zone of the client running the JDBC. But we also need to support times that work always independently of the zones. All this applies to timestamp and to time type, and this also implies some changes in time with time zone type. Let's not dig into that, perhaps. So some of those things have already been done. We spent a lot of time on the core scalars, literals, toggles, and tests. We also implemented the necessary changes in base JDBC, but we didn't implement proper timestamp changes in the JDBC connectors just yet, and the reason is that the JDBC the databases we support, Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, Redshift, they don't really follow standard as well. So it's a bit problematic because this thinking what this type is supposed to represent needs to be done. There is an issue listing a whole lot bigger and smaller things that are to be done still. I narrowed this down to things that we could work, that are like low-hanging fruit that can be worked on in the near future, provided that someone wants to join this effort and have cycles for that. So we have some homework to do regarding Hive Semantics and what they changed in 3.1. In the issue, there is a link to Hive Jira and there were actually a few issues in the Hive Jira that should be consulted for that. We need to have test environments for testing compatibility with Hive versions. We have such environments for Hive 1 and Hive 2, both from using HDP and CDH platforms, and we need to have such environments for Hive 3 as well. There are JDBC changes that can be done without waiting for the Hive changes, so independently. And there are like design changes for time of times, and there is an issue that we should remove political time zones from this type, but we didn't do yet. I started some work on that and didn't have time to finish that. So if someone wants to join this effort, I can hand it over, or I can continue when I have time for that. So, questions, comments, let's talk.
Okay, so for the first item, Hive timestamp semantics, there's actually a great wiki page on the, there's a great Hive wiki that they have a table that shows like what the older and newer Hive semantics are and what they are in like different databases like MySQL and Oracle.
Yeah.
You might have linked to that already.
Yeah, we should point it. I will dig the link and point it. I will link in the issue.
Yeah, so for Hive 3.1, we found out that basically binary formats like Avro and Porque are just broken. They're not backwards or forwards compatible in Hive 3.1, which is just a bug. An RC file binary that they, we talked to somebody on the Hive team and they said they're aware that it's broken and they're working on fixing it. So basically, we'd recommend nobody use Hive 3.1 for now because of that issue. That timestamps are just, if you read old data with Hive 3.1, you'll get the wrong answer. And if you write data in Hive 3.1, you won't be able to read it in older versions of Hive or Presto.
Or Spark or anything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so we had an idea on how to update all the connectors or how to make that smoother. And the idea is we could add a translation layer at basically a wrapper for connectors so that they'll translate to or from legacy or new timestamp semantics. So basically a connector would say, I support legacy, and then the engine would insert a wrapper to convert from like legacy to new. And then what that would allow us to do is completely convert the engine to new timestamp semantics without having to update all the connectors in one shot. And it would also allow us to, like in the meantime, we could we could also have a conversion in the other direction so that we could start updating connectors before we switch the engine over, assuming we wanted to do that.
Yeah, so for connectors, we have option, because engine supports currently supports both legacy and new semantics, and there is a session toggle available in connector sessions, so connectors can be migrated independently of each other, and so you can turn on new semantics, but the problem is that you don't have connectors that's supported besides memory connector, which supports everything because it doesn't interpret the data in any way. The translation layer, I didn't think about that, and this is an interesting idea. We had some code in Hive connector that would do that, and we still have this code, by the way. We just were not sure whether this is the right thing to do long term, but it is valuable. We can work on that. It works on the page and block level. So if we know we need to do some tweaks in the data, and then we realize which type is a timestamp, which type can contain a timestamp like row or map, and then we do the shuffling of the data. With Hive, I had an impression that there are more than just semantics problems, and that different storage formats may require different approaches. And even if we use, for example, embedded like Hive server directly, Hive has a concept that a JVM zone is the session zone, and this is not true in our case, and this may cause problems. Like the fact that Presto doesn't have this assumption causes some storage format to behave improperly unless you use the same session zone as JVM zone or something like that. So the translation layer, as an interim solution, this is a good idea. Long term, this is not a solution long term because of the representability problem that legacy cannot tell the values.
The reason we thought of this was because we were basically talking about like how can we move more aggressively forward on this this which has been open for ages. Yeah, and the big issue is like, what about people who all the people who have their own custom connectors for whatever's in their environment or non-public stuff. And if we went this model, then that would allow us to, even once we move the whole engine forward, to have a backwards compatible way for the people who are who haven't updated yet. And some of those bits will be helpful for things like Hive, where some of the formats may need an adapter for a while until they catch up. So
makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, I think I ran into something in Hive for the generic formats that use the Hive survey. Like, I think we do the translation at the top level for timestamps, but we don't do that they're nested inside like an array or a map. Yeah, there's some weird stuff in there that is not very well tested.
Right, and one thing I'd like to ask for other people in the call: do you use timestamp? Do you rely on the current semantics, like, or is this a non-issue? Like, is it something that will be painless because people just don't use it?
So before answering that, the thing that's most noticeable would be if you have clients that are configured to different time zones. So for example, in the setup at Facebook, we hard coded every client, no matter where they were in the world, to run in Pacific time. And then everything just worked the way people would expect. Like the time zone, the value shown to you as an end user wouldn't change. Now you still have this add an hour and it adds 2 hours issue, or subtract an hour and you actually, it's just the add an hour that you get a problem there.
Yeah.
Like that.
If you force everything to UTC, then everything works perfectly fine.
Sure, sure. But even for like Hive, because Hive was always based around the idea that all the clients and servers ran in the same time zone, in which case it just works. And in Hive, if you want to write today in Presto, the engine requires that you have that your system time zone matches your storage time zone. Otherwise, like you can't write because there's no way to correct for it because the file formats are broken today.
Yeah. They internally use the system time zone.
Yeah. So the impact the biggest impact I think for end users is going to be if you have a person running a CLI in California using California time, you have a person running the CLI in Poland, they're going to get Poland time, and they're just going to be different. And if that's what you desire, that behavior will change.
This is not the only scenario where you can run into problems. The other scenario is that when you have services deployed in the cloud and you have servers defaulting to UTC.
Yeah.
You have clients anywhere actually, and the client will not be using UTC like in California or Poland or anywhere, and then you are running into problems because the session time zone is different, and this is enough to have some problem. The nice thing is that you don't have problems every day. You have problems only sometimes, but the bad problem is that you may rely on timestamp semantics unknowingly, or you can be bitten by this problem suddenly.
Yeah, so I think the question is how do people use timestamps or not? Like one of the things at Facebook we almost never use timestamps for data that was stored because they use like either strings or like partition keys were just strings and so on. So it may not be a problem in practice for most people. So that's why I think like.
Good question. Yeah, can anyone comment?
I think we put everyone to sleep.
Yeah.
We had one customer who we saw was using timestamp and had issues. I don't really remember. This was a long time back, and it was very similar to what you brought up, where server was running in a different time zone, and the client was in a different time zone altogether. And when they were reading, there were multiple markups being done. So they were actually writing data as part of it, and there were 2 times. So they were converting from UTC to IST, and I believe at the end of it, 2 times the 530 difference was getting added to the return value. So, but we haven't heard this a lot. So this was only one customer we saw at Cubol.
Yeah, so I can comment as well. So from what I see, our customers use timestamp at least from time to time and running into different problems, not only regarding semantics, but also regarding different libraries being used. This is orthogonal topic actually. So timestamp is used in the wild, unfortunately. I would prefer just number, which is an instant, but people just feel that.
So the question, I think the important part of the question is, are the people using your stuff going to be universally happy with the change, or are some people going to be like, no, I really needed the old version and now I don't have that, and I have this new version which I don't like, and then like we're making some people happy and the other ones not.
This is the hard question. I would speculate that some people will be unhappy. Even if you fix stuff, some people usually come unhappy. But the good thing is that you need to have quite some transition period, because there's no way to implement everything at once. And when people turn out to be unhappy, you can prolong this transition period until you explain or find a solution, or just give them time to accommodate. So yeah, I think this unhappy people should they actually shouldn't prevent us from fixing stuff. The worst things that can happen is that they will need to turn on a compatibility toggle with previous version.
But another option, if a lot of people really need the old semantics, we could potentially implement the timestamp with local time zone type that Oracle and Hive have, which is effectively what the old one does. Yeah,
and we may end up doing that, for example, because Hive added such a type in Hive 3.1, and to map it properly in Presto, we would need either present it as a timestamp with time zone and just add some time zone to that, or add this new type for better representation.
So what about the question of running the server and the clients in different time zones? Is that something that you've seen in the wild, something people do?
Yeah. So so this is actually default. When you run something on AWS, you run in UTC by default, and when you connect from your computer, you're running in your real time zone by default. So this actually happens.
Okay.
I think it's very common in EC2 because I guess everything in EC2 is UTC by default, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
But the laptops are not in AWS.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments about timestamps? No? Okay. So there was a question from Rohini. Rohini, do you want to ask the question directly, or we can address it here?
Yeah, I just basically wanted to mention like bucket pruning as well to be added to the list.
Bucket pruning for the dynamic filter.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's I don't think that's the design prevents that. I think actually that fits nicely. Like if we can prune, if we can push the.
How would that work? You would basically on the join side, you would need to figure out which buckets had values in it based on the Hive side. That's actually similar to the
bucket pruning we already do.
Well, I was going to say it's similar to the problem of the bloom filters, because you'd have to use the exact hash algorithm. It's like another version of that. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I was going to mention when we're talking about bloom filters, I was going to mention one of the things we've been thinking about is, and especially once all the function, dynamic function resolution and the change of the abstraction in the abstractions there that we're working on goes in, we can have connectors expose the reference to a function that is being used for hashing for the bloom filters or for hashing for the buckets, and then the engine can use that as a function it uses for partitioning or for building the bloom filters directly, and then it will be compatible. So I think that just fits nicely. But yeah, let's track it in the issue so we account for that in the design.
Thank you.
Okay.
We got 8 minutes.
Yeah, we got 8 minutes. So this is just I want to bring up the question. We're not going to have much time for discussing, but so Java 8 is end of life already. Presto can run in Java 10 and Java 11. At Facebook, we're running it on Java 10 successfully. Java 11 is not a significant change in terms of runtime compared to Java 10. So the question we wanted to raise is, I think it's time to start considering moving the code base to Java 11. That means building Presto with Java 11 and starting to take advantage of any new language features that have been introduced since Java 9. Because right now we're compiling using Java 8 level features. So, the thing is, if we look at Presto as a black box, as a standalone thing, it would seem to be reasonable that we should be able to do that, but
for the server side.
For the server side, of course, for the client, that's a different thing, different issue. Like we don't want to break anyone that's using the JDC driver or the clients. So we will need to figure out how to maintain compatibility with Java 8 for that. But we also understand that people have custom patches. Or some people may not be able to deploy Java 11 because of constraints on their management infrastructure and so on. There are some things we've been thinking about or how to address that, but basically we just want to bring up the question and have people start thinking about that, and we'll follow up on the Slack channel, and hopefully maybe next time we can talk about some of this more in depth. So that was just the public announcement. So yeah, if you have questions, if you have comments, then let's have a discussion on Slack, and we can create our channel for that too.
Does anyone have any questions about these topics or any other topics? Like, we have 5 minutes for just open questions.
Is there any plans to do a Jira or any other task tracking system?
Yeah, sorry, you said Jira or any tracking system?
Yeah, task tracking system instead of Slack. Yeah.
I mean,
GitHub issues are nice, but it's hard to keep track of things or search and find information.
Yeah, so specifically, this is very nice because I was just yesterday we were talking about adding better tagging, and so we absolutely use GitHub for everything. Running more infrastructure would be kind of problematic, but I think we can improve what we're doing on GitHub, and we'll see how that works. So the first idea is that we're going to create a tag called roadmap. And so once there's tags created, you can just go directly to that. And so this will be a tag that highlights the big items that are being worked on across the community. So that would include dynamic filtering, the timestamp project, high availability for the coordinator, the predicate pushdown, and there's probably a few more others that I'm forgetting about right now. So the idea would be to basically come up with a better way to organize and see how that works. Does that seem reasonable?
Kind of Epicure. Then would you like to mark Epicures?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
You would tag the Epicures, the long-living issues that require substantial work, right?
Yeah, kind of the high level items that cover a broad area of work. Yeah. Separately from the individual pieces that make up the chain.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Which we can explore.
We could look at that too.
Yeah. What David said, I didn't hear.
GitHub has the projects feature. We've never looked at it, but it might help solve this issue.
Yeah, we were just talking about this the last few days about it being difficult to track. There's no great place to do it. We used to use a wiki, but it didn't really update very well. It needs to be really responsive to the community.
So projects is nice. We are using it internally, but this is more suitable when you have broken down the work into smaller items and you are executing it. I'm not sure it's it might be applicable for example, with timestamp, we have identified like smallish items that could be worked upon, and it could be represented as a project using project on GitHub. For dynamic filtering, it wouldn't work as well because there are like more higher level things to do, and they are not so tiny, and there are not so many as at the same time.
Rohini, is there so what is the biggest thing you think it's hard to hard to figure out with the way we're using GitHub? Like maybe we can tackle that or try to tackle that first.
No, like right now I have to end up like searching Git, searching Slack, and searching Slack is not actually like very easy. I have to jump from conversation to conversation, and it's like to find actually what's happening. So that's why I was asking that. Like GitHub projects might be like a good idea to like start with.
And you're mostly looking for roadmap style, like what's going on, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, we are almost out of time, so I'd like to thank Ranak and Piotr for helping drive these discussions on dynamic filtering and timestamps. Let's keep if people have more discussion points or things you want to follow up, we can keep chatting on Slack. Let's create those issues to track the work, and well, let's figure out a way to make it easier for people in the community to follow what we're doing. So thanks everyone. We'll post the video online soon, as soon as we get the recording from Zoom. I think we're done.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.